welcome to our webinar, Lightening the Load, Scaling Clean Solutions for Data Centers and Communities. Next slide, please. So a quick introduction about RMI. RMI, or formerly known as the Rocky Mountain Institute, is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit. We are focused on market-driven solutions to accelerate a prosperous, clean energy future for all. And our team has supported over 200 cities across the country, helping public and private sector organizations advance sustainable energy systems. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to hear from multiple people on our team, as well as Latricia Adams, the president of Young, Gifted, and Green, and Steve Abbott, Jasmine Chio, myself, and Zach. During the webinar, please feel free to drop any questions. We'll try our best to answer them, and feel free to follow up with any of us after the webinar, or if you're watching this recording, to hear directly from us. So today we have three objectives. First, we're going to review the risks and opportunities for data centers that they pose for communities. And then we're going to identify clean energy strategies that can reduce costs and enhance reliability. And third, we're going to discuss actionable steps for communities to mitigate risks and maximize local benefits. Next slide, please. So just a quick walkthrough of our agenda. I'm going to give us a brief introduction on data center development trends that we've been observing. And then Steve will discuss data center load growth impacts and solutions. We'll then move forward to our case study, which is Memphis, Tennessee. We'll first hear remarks from Latricia, and then Jasmine will walk through our analysis. And then Zach and Jasmine will discuss actionable steps for communities, and we'll wrap up with a Q&A. So for our introduction, we've been observing over the past few years that data centers have proliferated across many parts of the country. Historically, there have been primary markets that have already hosted many data centers, but now we're observing that emerging markets from New York to Houston to LA are confronting data centers for the first time for many. Now, this brings a complex set of both concerns and opportunities. Stakeholders have pointed out the opportunity for significant local tax revenue from hosting data centers, as well as other economic benefits, while many have also shared concerns, including data centers' effects on energy affordability, public health and the environment, emissions, land use, and noise. We've also specifically observed that it's caused that data centers have historically represented only 4.4% of electricity consumption as of 2023 in the United States. However, by 2028, LBNL projects that the share of demand is forecast to be about 6.7 to 12% of electricity consumption. And that's equivalent to the entirety of the United Kingdom, up to Germany's 505 terawatts of electricity consumption. So it's a huge proportion of energy increase that we're discussing. To better discuss this load growth, we're going to now move forward and discuss how load growth data centers have impacted load growth and the solutions that are proposed. I'll pass it over to Steve.
Thank you, Noor, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I'm going to be speaking about the impacts of load growth in communities and a range of local solutions that we think offer communities, utilities, and regulators a real opportunity to address potential concerns. Next slide, please. To start with, I wanted to note that data centers can, in fact, provide communities with significant financial benefits, particularly in the form of property taxes. To take an extreme example, Loudoun County, which is in the northern part of Virginia, is the self-proclaimed data center alley, with almost 50 million square feet of data centers either operational or under construction. By leveraging less than 3% of the county's land, they have been able to generate $875 million in property taxes per year from these data centers. And that revenue has allowed them to reduce property taxes for their local residents by about 25% over the last decade. Next slide, please. That being said, there are a range of energy and financial related challenges for communities that can arise from load growth that data centers bring. I'm going to focus on three of these today. The first is potential increases in utility costs. The second is potential exposure from overbuilding. And the third is concerns around degraded grid reliability. Let's dive into each of these in turn. Next slide, please. First, to set the context for rising utility costs, I want to note that communities around the country are already struggling with rising electricity costs. This chart here from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis shows that since 2022, electricity prices have risen almost 40% for residents in US cities. Next slide, please. Now, load growth and data centers can increase costs of electricity in some circumstances. In recent years, there's been some research to suggest that load growth has actually reduced costs of electricity by helping to spread existing fixed costs over greater volumes of sales. However, looking forward, I think it's fair to say that there are potential risks that prices could go up in a variety of scenarios. For example, if the new demand that data centers bring to the grid comes online faster and outstrips the addition of new supply, that could drive up prices. If the costs of new grid infrastructure exceed historic levels, that could drive up prices. And if the costs of new infrastructure are not shared appropriately between ratepayers and technology companies, that could also drive up prices. Could you advance the slide? We've actually seen this already starting to play out in one area of the country known as PJM, which is a grid operator that spans roughly from Chicago down to Virginia. In last year's auction, the 2025-2026 auction, the capacity market in PJM, the prices in the capacity market spiked sharply. And the impacts of this were roughly estimated to add about $120 to the residential annual bills in Washington, D.C. In this latest year, prices spiked even further, and the market monitor concluded that data center load growth was the primary reason for recent and expected capacity market conditions. Now let's turn to financial exposure from overbuilding. Utilities and communities can suffer if the anticipated demand from data centers does not end up materializing. And to illustrate how this might play out, let's go back to the early 2000s and the dot-com boom. And I want to just read this quote from a Utility Dive article. 25 years ago, a data center boom helped fuel a race to build gas-fired power plants, with the energy secretary, utilities, politicians, and experts warning of blackouts, economic stagnation, if the country didn't meet surging demand for electricity. That may sound eerily familiar to many of us on this call today. And the result of these predictions was that we saw a spike in natural gas construction over the early 2000s. Next slide, please. However, things did not go forward as people had anticipated. Due to efficiency gains and productivity improvements, and of course the dot-com bust, utilities were left with an excess amount of generation capacity, and ratepayers were left footing the bill. And you can see in this chart on the right side, the sharp drop in generator capacity utilization that occurred in the early aftermath of the dot-com boom right around the year 2000. Next slide, please. The third potential risk is degraded grid reliability, and there are two components to this. The first is that groups of data centers that exit or join the grid all at once when unexpected events occur can destabilize the system. We've already seen examples of this in Northern Virginia and in Texas, where power surges in the grid caused gigawatts of data centers to quickly exit the grid and switch over to backup generation. But this left the grid operator scrambling to try to balance supply and demand again, and only barely avoided massive, large-scale blackouts. The second form of grid reliability issue, next slide, please, it relates to power quality and things like power surges. And there's anecdotal evidence, including the chart here from Bloomberg.com, that shows a correlation between the location of lots of data centers and degraded power quality in local contexts. And this could threaten local appliances, electronics, etc. Next slide, please. Fortunately, we view there as being a range of local investments that can help address all of these challenges. And I'm going to bucket these solutions into opportunities that are behind the meter, those that are within the community, and those that are at the utility level. Next slide, please. To start with things that we can invest in behind the meter, meaning at the data center. The first is energy efficiency. Things like more efficient cooling systems can significantly reduce the amount of energy that these facilities require. Second is flexibility. And this is really helpful for reducing strain on the grid during those times when what we call peak hours, when the grid is maxed out in terms of delivering electricity to local businesses and residents. And flexibility at data centers could look like changing the timing of their computations to do more work in the evening or in the early morning when the grid is not so strained. Or it could mean shifting that computational requirement to data centers in other parts of the country that are not experiencing grid strain. Third, data center companies could be installing more rooftop solar or behind the meter solar or battery storage. And these would both reduce the overall net purchases from the utility and thereby also reduce emissions, and could also further support flexibility and further reduce strain on the grid during peak hours. Next slide. There are also a range of community level investments that can produce tangible affordability and resilience benefits for local residents and businesses. One of these is called virtual power plants, where utilities or other companies aggregate lots of small devices, such as smart thermostats, battery systems within people's houses, EVs and rooftop solar. And by aggregating all of these together, are able to compile enough flexibility or generation capacity to effectively have a power plant at their disposal. And these have been shown to be very cost effective in some studies. Another version of this is demand response, whereby a utility might work with a large industrial company to have them reduce their usage or stop operations altogether during those few hours of the year where the grid is really at maximum capacity. Local governments and nonprofits also have the opportunity to run what are called solarized style programs, where they provide a range of outreach to community members and streamlined opportunities for local residents and businesses to adopt clean technologies, such as rooftop solar and batteries. Finally, there's the opportunity to invest in microgrids and resilience hubs. These are installations at critical facilities or community centers that leverage rooftop solar and battery storage systems to provide reliable, consistent power during everyday operations and also when there are power outages, providing a key source of resilience for local communities. Next slide. Finally, there are utility scale efforts that regarding new tariff structures or investments in local clean technologies that can further reduce costs and appropriately distribute responsibility. A few of the ones that we are most excited about are first, grid enhancing technologies. This is a portfolio of relatively low-cost technologies that allow utilities to get more out of their existing transmission and distribution infrastructure, and thereby avoid or at least postpone building out additional capacity. Another opportunity is to invest in large-scale local generation. And one area that we think is underappreciated are bright fields, which is putting solar on closed landfills or old industrial sites and enabling productive reuse of those blighted properties. Finally, there's a lot of great work being done on devising new large load tariffs or rate structures that are specifically designed to enable data center companies to pay their fair share and help to address some of these challenges that their operations might bring to communities. Next slide. So to tie this all together, I wanted to quickly revisit the three risks that we talked about before and how some of these technologies could help address them. First, we have utility costs. A number of the technologies I just discussed, such as virtual power plants, energy efficiency, demand response, and flexibility, actually mitigate the need to build out new infrastructure altogether, and thereby reduce the amount of new costs you're adding onto the system. Secondly, locally owned assets such as rooftop solar or community solar can directly reduce customer bills in a local municipality. Second, let's talk about financial exposure to overdevelopment. Again, any of these solutions that mitigate the need to build expensive new infrastructure are going to limit the exposure of these local communities to potential risks of overbuilding. Furthermore, clean technologies generally have low to no marginal cost to operate, and as such, they're very unlikely to be sitting idle, even if the future demand does not end up meeting current expectations. Third and finally, we have degraded reliability. To start with, local microgrids and resilience hubs can ensure power continuity to critical facilities and to vulnerable community members throughout disasters. And second, local storage installations, either behind the meter at the data center company or distributed throughout a community, can help stabilize local power quality. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jasmine to start walking us through a case study.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve, for that overview. So as Steve said, we wanted to apply these strategies to a local context and illustrate their potential impacts in a case study. So we selected Memphis, Tennessee, which is currently hosting significant data center infrastructure. But before I do that, I'm excited to welcome Latricia Adams, the president of Young, Gifted, and Green, a national civil rights and environmental justice nonprofit focused on policy solutions for the nation's top environmental and public health crises. As a community leader in Memphis, she will share her perspective on the growth of data centers and potential solutions. So, welcome, Latricia.
Thank you so much. Again, I am so honored to be here with RMI as a proud daughter of Memphis, South Memphis to be exact, exactly where XAI is located in zip code 38109. Before my career into environmental justice, I served as the public school educator for 16 years and have always been an advocate for the health and well-being of my beloved hometown. It does my heart well to engage with you all today on the topic of the hour, lightening the load, scaling clean solutions for data centers and communities. As we discuss the growing presence of data centers in our local communities, it's crucial to look beyond the promises of economic growth and examine the real implications for our neighborhoods. While the data center industry promises to bring economic investment and development, they also pose significant concerns that we must address head on. Many families in Memphis, for example, are already struggling with high energy costs. Increased data center demands could amplify this burden, leading to higher utility bills without necessarily providing clear benefits to the community. We are right to be cautious, as there are risks associated with overbuilding infrastructure based on uncertain projections. But here's where we can pivot the narrative. Scaling clean energy solutions offers not only a potential solution to the strain on our power grid, but also significant public health benefits for our communities. Clean energy or solar energy has the power to reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, leading to healthier living conditions for everyone, but particularly for neighborhoods like South Memphis that are already grappling with environmental injustices, as 38109 has 17 polluting industries just in that zip code alone. With the data and science talent of RMI, we've explored the potential for solar energy strategies in communities and how these can help address low growth issues, which Jasmine will talk about here shortly. However, this isn't just about energy, it's about improving health outcomes. By transitioning to clean energy, we can mitigate the harmful impacts of fossil fuels, which disproportionately affect low income communities and communities of color. While data centers may again promise jobs and technological advances, we must ensure that these benefits are not an empty shell. Communities have the right to take the lead. We should engage with all stakeholders to create thoughtful plans that prioritize public health and environmental justice. Our community engagement should focus on genuine collaboration and shared governance, identifying local priorities that reflect what residents truly want and what they truly need. This means enacting local policies that prioritize the deployment of clean energy solutions, such as a robust solar program, community solar initiatives, and community resilience hubs that put power back into the hands of the people. We must involve local utilities and regulators to unlock further opportunities for collective investments in clean infrastructure. We can advocate for the establishment of effective rules and procedures that prioritize sustainability, affordability, and health, transforming how we think about energy and data storage. With innovative data and science-driven examples from RMI, communities like mine in Memphis are building people power to focus on solutions while still holding data centers accountable for being good neighbors and stewards of our most vulnerable communities. Our priority should be to foster clean energy solutions that enhance public health and protect our communities to ensure that our future is built on sustainable practices that benefit all of us, no matter the zip code or the socioeconomic status. So thank you so much again. I'm excited to take this deep dive on this wonderful research that's coming from RMI. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Latricia. It's really great to have you here today, especially considering your proximity to the issue and your general support and all of the important community engagement that you have run. So thanks for being here. So moving on to the case study. So to explore the possible benefits of these clean energy strategies in Memphis with the goal to ultimately offset the data centers' contribution to peak load, we picked out a number of behind the meter measures and community level interventions that we felt could be part of an ambitious yet reasonable deployment scenario. I want to first preface by saying that this by no means captures the city's entire technical potential. We created this hypothetical scenario to illustrate the possible benefits, and there may be local contextual issues and constraints that weren't publicly available that could change these findings. But what we did find is that if Memphis deployed a combination of these strategies, the city could offset 65% of the data center's additional load during Memphis's peak hours from 1 to 7 p.m. The graph here shows the city's load with the added energy capacity from the data center, so note the top blue line. And the orange line shows the potential peak load mitigation with clean energy interventions. This is a significant finding because reducing peak demand can help to maintain system reliability, can help avoid the activation of microturbines or peaker plants, which are often gas powered and more expensive to operate than baseload resources. And as Steve was saying, it can help to defer the need for new and expensive infrastructure upgrades. So, what was the process for putting this study together? So, using desktop research, feasibility studies from the utility, and project announcements from the data center company, we selected potential sites for implementation and sized those systems using PV Watts, a tool that helps estimate solar production. We then estimated the generation and storage capacity based off the total sizing from the different systems. Because our focus is on peak load mitigation, we modeled using west-facing solar generation data, since west-facing solar panels will capture more sunlight during Memphis's late afternoon summer peak hours. And with battery storage, we set the modeling so that battery systems would start charging during the earliest hours that solar is available and discharge power for 3 hours in the afternoon when demand is highest. After that, we then overlaid this data with load information from Memphis and the additional data centers load. And we identified a number of different solutions for this illustrative case study. First, there are behind the meter opportunities at the 2 data center facilities. These include rooftop solar and documented plans for solar and storage systems on adjacent parcels. We also included estimates for off-site utility scale and commercial scale renewable projects that were pre-selected in a past utility study and also happened to be downstream from the data center along existing transmission lines. We also assessed opportunities for bright fields, which are possible where former industrial land can host renewable projects. Memphis has a number of brownfield sites, and we specifically noted the Johnson Yard Superfund site, which has enough space to host a 42 megawatt solar PV system. Next, we explored the possibility of a virtual power plant program. So, using data from existing residential battery VPP programs around the country and taking the average number of customers and capacity per customer, we estimate that Memphis's local utility could enroll 2,500 customers from dispersed residential sites, totaling about 30 megawatts of energy storage. Our study also acknowledges the potential for resilience hubs, which can utilize solar and storage technologies as well as microgrid technology and provide essential services and reliable power during outages. For example, Doubletree Elementary School seems to be a potentially feasible site for a resilience hub, given that it is nestled in a residential neighborhood and seems to have good solar potential. Our modeling assumes that the city could build up to 5 sites like this distributed across the country. And another significant opportunity is a demand response program, where, as Steve mentioned, the local utility could enroll large industrial facilities who are willing to shed load or shift operations away from peak hours. While we didn't include this in quantitative modeling because of limited public information, we did find that industrial sites in Memphis, such as the new Core Steel plant and the first data center facility, have already signed agreements to shed load during peak events. So other industrial users can do the same if their operations permit this type of flexibility. So with all of these strategies combined, Memphis could see 750 megawatts of solar generation capacity and 280 megawatts of battery energy storage capacity, which can mitigate load during peak hours by 65%. And this is significant not just because clean energy strategies have the potential to cover a majority of additional load that the data centers bring online, but they could also yield many potential community benefits, including lowering energy bills at a time when electricity costs are increasing, enhanced community resilience, especially during grid outage events, less financial risk from overbuilding infrastructure, and cleaner air when you can avoid using fossil fuel assets. And so finally, our team wants to share actionable steps that you can take to create better outcomes. You can think of these as part of your toolkit for how to address data center development. You have supporting mechanisms to help lock in opportunities, and you have safeguards for potentially negative consequences. So in no sequential order, these are first, enacting beneficial local policies and programs. Second, actionable steps for how to collaborate with the data center company. Third, engaging with your local utility, regulators, and legislators. And to do these first few things really well, we'll talk about how you can proactively design a community engagement process and organize your community's priorities. You'll hear from my colleague, Zach, about this step. So first, here are policy tools that you can consider in your local jurisdiction. So first, building energy codes and performance standards can help ensure high energy efficiency for data centers. This can help reduce energy consumption and curb demand. Codes are important because they set requirements and building design specifications for new builds, and performance standards apply to existing buildings to ensure a minimum level of performance over the lifetime of that building. You can reference ASHRAE 90.4, which is the current industry standard for new data centers. Second, local governments can help to create enabling environments for clean energy deployment. There's a vital role here to reduce the soft costs related to, say, permitting, interconnection, and also customer acquisition by running outreach and renewable energy adoption campaigns. Third, zoning rules can be an important pathway here for two purposes. One, to enable renewable energy deployment where it's been restricted before, to allow the greater deployment of solutions, but also zoning can be used to help manage data center development, given infrastructure demands and also projected environmental impacts. Lastly, municipalities and local communities can explore numerous financing mechanisms from green banks to infrastructure bonds to help fund local energy projects. Next is how to effectively collaborate with the data center company. So communities have the biggest sway in the early phases of site development before plans are solidified and permits are issued. Here are a few things you can share with developers to ensure mutually beneficial outcomes. First is encouraging the full use of behind-the-meter opportunities. So aligning with a developer on best practices for project design and aligning with community expectations. Next, it's possible to pursue formal project agreements with the company. Here listed on the slide are a few different types of agreements. So for example, the first one, community benefits. This is a community benefits agreement. This is a legally binding contract that outlines direct community benefits. There's also a host community agreement where this spells out financial contributions or services that a developer must provide to the host community. Lastly, here, there's a opportunity to propose clean energy partnership models. This is where local authorities can explore various arrangements to deploy local clean energy with the data center developer. These can happen through direct ownership, subsidization, power purchase agreements, or leases. And communities can even consider a large load tariff fund where data centers can pay into that fund, and that fund would then distribute resources to fund local projects. And next is engaging local utilities, regulators, and legislators, as these partners are important since they have special authorities and vantage points on broader system improvements. First, there's an opportunity to partner with your local utility to ensure accurate forecasts of demand and also explore options for distributed energy investments. Next, with regulators, they have a unique authority to adjust tariff structures that can include specific requirements for large load users and also institute ratepayer protections. And finally, with legislators, communities play a critical role in rolling up local needs to state and local leaders and informing policy solutions that can ensure responsible and sustainable development of data centers. So communities, if willing, can support or advocate for state programs that link data center development to clean energy growth, grid enhancements, and other advancements in efficiency and other things. And one more note too on this is while engaging with these partners, leading with cost allocation is key. There is a win-win potential here where large load users can get the power that they need and ratepayers can continue to receive affordable energy. Utilities and regulators can embed these ratepayer safeguards into large load tariffs to ensure fair cost allocation. And shown here on the slide are two key resources that our team at RMI have recently released to support awareness and implementation of these tariff structures. So now I will pass it off to my colleague, Zach, who can speak to proactive community engagement and coordination, which underpins all of these actionable steps. So Zach, take it away.
Thank you, Jasmine. If there's one thing to take away from this final content, it's time. Think long term. It feels like these projects are happening fast across the country. They're popping up everywhere, but the impacts will be felt over many years. So we've already heard potential impacts on customers and different strategies and resources to help address the three main risks like from Steve and Jasmine. And I now want to walk through the potential long-term benefits you could get from these projects and how to go through this process, building on what we heard from Latricia and from Jasmine as well. In the very beginning, thinking about developing an engagement plan and identifying collective priorities, here are some questions you could think of even before a project is proposed in your community, such as what benefits from this type of project are you excited about? What concerns do you have? And what adjustments the project could help address these concerns, be it new community resources, assets, programs, or other adjustments to help enhance local quality of life. You could also be thinking about these questions during project siting and development as well. And we've included some other guiding questions for your reflection going forward after this webinar. Next slide. Investing in engagement early can reduce risk for communities, developers, increase transparency, and start to identify potential benefits and adjustments to the project. So even before a project is proposed, start understanding your community landscape. What groups might be most affected by the project with socioeconomic or demographic information you're aware of, and hear their concerns. And review local financial budgets, whether at the municipal level or with different nonprofits or organizations, and gaps to determine how projects that are proposed could help meet some key needs in your communities, and what sorts of overlaps do you have in your priorities and theirs. Thinking about providing impact and input on the project with the company once projects are proposed, to continue seeking feedback from other community stakeholders as a project is progressing. And finally, establishing expectations and engagement structure. Thinking about a formal advisory board of community stakeholders for a united ongoing collaboration and negotiation with the company. Please see our advisory board charter template in our new toolkit we just published if you'd find that helpful. Next slide. When we think about the long-term benefits, in addition to near-term construction jobs from these projects, we want to direct you to a catalog we've developed of 50 high-quality benefit examples that have already been implemented in real life by clean energy projects around the US. We see these as high quality because of the benefits that they're providing, and also the engagement process that the utility or the developer went through with the community to get there. We think of it as a menu that you could consider in your community for what you might want. And we also complement it with 15 metrics to help measure and demonstrate the impact. We touched on accountability earlier today, and this is very important for the specificity and transparency. I will note that this catalog is mainly wind, solar, and battery projects, but we do think it's transferable to data center projects as well. Next, please. And last but not least, consider who else in your community has some of these concerns about new projects coming in or could be excited about these opportunities. There's many folks that are probably in your same community who would be excited to work together to help form that advisory board, to start to think through the financial opportunities and what an engagement process could look like. So here's some suggestions in both rural and urban areas that you could consider as well for comprehensiveness. Next. Here's a recommendation. Since I threw many resources at you, they're all in one web page. We'll pass that out at the end of the webinar in our follow-up email, but there's a toolkit for what initial engagement looks like. This is recommendations for us to different developers and utilities for how they can best enter communities when they're proposing a project. But a lot of that content is also applicable to your work as well, thinking about what reflection you want to do ahead of time and as projects are proposed. There's the catalog and the metrics and additional research as well. And for my last slide, here's an example. This is what we call the community benefits building blocks. So there's 15 or so different steps categorized across the entire project lifecycle. You don't need to do this in order, but it is set up that way, whether it's through collaborating on the engagement process, identifying benefits, and increasing accountability. A lot of this isn't particularly rocket science, but it is really nice to have all in one place, because doing that framework will really help in any sort of engagement you're hoping to do in your community. Thank you, and I'll pass to Nor.
Thank you once again. I hope you all appreciated our presentation. We're now going to move to our Q&A portion. And we've already seen some questions come in, but please continue to send in your questions. Any questions we don't get to during this time, we will try our best to reach out to you and reply. We've also already answered some questions by text, so please see if any of those has been replied to yet. So my first question that I see here is we wanted to ask you about the case study and how the set of interventions could offset 65% of data centers' additional load during peak hours. How should we think about the remaining 35%? What could cover that gap? Jasmine, are you able to answer?
Yeah, I can go ahead and take a stab at this. So with the case study, we actually did not max out the potential for the behind the meter measures as well as the community level. You might remember my note from that slide where it doesn't, what we had studied does not capture the full potential. So there's a potential for more deployment of behind the meter and community level strategies. We also, because of limited information, did not include utility scale efforts. So think the grid enhancing technologies that Steve mentioned, larger utility scale renewable energy deployments. So when it comes to covering the gap, I would consider those additional measures.
Great. Thank you so much, Jasmine. Our next question is for Latricia. In your experience as president of Young, Gifted, and Green, a national nonprofit, what are some best practices that you use for effective community engagement?
Yeah, so we use a myriad of strategies. The one that is most effective for us is actually door knocking. So it's a old school tactic, but very, very helpful. Some of the things that we find from doing door knocking is one, it's more personable, and it provides an opportunity to really answer some of the questions or have the ability to follow up if we don't have that answer in real time. The other strategies that we use, and this one probably is a no-brainer, is social media. We use social media as an education tool heavy. One, because oftentimes we find that with data centers, they're not very transparent. You don't really hear very much from the data centers altogether. And so that leaves too much room for error for misunderstandings, miseducation, a litany of issues, right, that could kind of go left. The other strategy that we use is town halls. So, specifically with elected officials that are allies around environment, particularly those elected officials that are really pro environment, pro sustainability, to actually encourage them to host town halls where they are providing those updates to their respective constituents. Also, and this is more so depending on where you are in the data center journey, we also did a significant amount of public comment trainings. So essentially, for example, here in Memphis, there was an air permit. Actually, the way that it's designed in Shelby County, which is where Memphis sits. Our health department actually issues out air permits. And so part of that was not just kind of prepping people for actual public comment, but educating them on what is the process of permitting, what does this mean. We also hosted public comment trainings pretty much with all of the permitting both on the air side and on the water side as well. And then the last thing that I will say is we also engage with building coalitions with other organizations that may not necessarily be environmental organizations that have a large reach. So with other kind of community-facing organizations, social justice organizations, because we know sometimes we can get in an environmental bubble. And so we really work diligently to build momentum with other organizations that also have a significant community reach as well.
Thank you, Latricia, for sharing your wisdom. We now have a question for Steve. How would we get buy-in from utilities to take on their fair share of costs for infrastructure improvements?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the barriers to these solutions being deployed more broadly is utilities' lack of familiarity with them and or resistance to doing things that they don't traditionally do. They're very good at deploying large-scale centralized infrastructure. And in many cases, they're incentivized to do that by how they're compensated from ratepayers. In terms of engaging with them, I think to start, we would always say, try to go talk to your utility directly. If you have a technology company or a data center company that's supportive, you could talk to them jointly, and that might bring more weight to the conversation. There's also the opportunity to engage with your elected officials or regulators. One important innovation that we've seen over the last decade is performance-based regulation, which shifts how utilities are incentivized and in some cases gives them actual incentives to meet things like energy efficiency targets, et cetera, and reducing the cost of electricity for ratepayers. So I think all of this requires a lot of conversation and engagement. And part of what we're trying to do here is build public awareness around these types of solutions so that we can start having more of those conversations.
Thank you, Steve. Now we have Laura asks, coming from a rural state with lots of local resistance to utility scale renewable projects, how do you activate these folks towards community action about data centers without fueling the fire to oppose renewable projects? Zach, do you want to take a stab at that?
Thanks, Nor, and thank you, Laura, for this question. I would say, great question. First of all, I think it's something we think about a lot because any kind of development in a new community, be it urban or rural, could definitely garner opposition for very legitimate reasons as well. And so regardless of the technology type, I would say consider what the actual benefits could be and understand what those projects are offering across the country as well to kind of get a sense of what the market is, so to speak, out there. I think when people start to understand what they could gain from projects, that might help them pause a second before having a gut reaction to new development as well. That being said, these two types of projects are different in some ways. Data centers may not seem like they're offering as many tangible benefits to communities and customers. And so I think a really thoughtful discussion is necessary to help parse that out.
Thank you, Zach. Let's see. Now we will move to. We have a question from Ellie Udall, who asks, are there any examples yet where a data center developer has agreed to a community benefits agreement or something similar? I'll let Jasmine and Latricia, do you know of any examples?
Latricia, do you have an answer
Yeah.
for this? Go for it.
Yeah, so the biggest example that I can give is with West Memphis, Arkansas. Not to be confused with Memphis, it's literally across the bridge. I can see the bridge from where I am right now. So what we think may have happened is essentially where Google may have seen some of what happened in Memphis, where the rollout with community did not go the way that it should have. So with Google, they did investments on the front end. They did some initial engagement before they even considered going into scale. And then also there have been some commitments around investments in their local schools as well. And Google is also considering potentially investment in solar as well. That's the biggest example that I have seen. More local to Memphis. Now, this isn't necessarily fully connected to something that XAI did. However, what's unique about Memphis is they did not do a pilot, so they're not getting any tax breaks. That's a bit of a win. And so, because of that, we were able to get a city ordinance where a percentage, and sorry for you hear this noise in the background, essentially a percentage of 25% of property tax revenue will actually go back directly into those impacted communities where Colossus 1 and Colossus 2, which are the two locations for the data centers, are located. But again, that was established through an ordinance. And since they're not paying property taxes, we did have a little flexibility there as well.
Thank you, Latricia. Now we have a question for Steve. Why are these local solutions not already being deployed to address data center load growth?
Yeah, our hypothesis is that there's a few reasons for this. One, I already mentioned, I think utilities are often much more comfortable with centralized solutions. Another important reason is that we've heard is that communities are not often asking for these. We've heard receptivity to these types of things from a large range of stakeholders, but we need more people to be asking for them in some of the, particularly the upfront conversations. The third is that particularly when you get into very distributed solutions, I think there may be opportunity for more innovation in terms of the programs and the administration of these programs to make them actually be deployed at the scale and the rate that we think is possible. So that's an area we're going to be looking into and watching closely.
Thank you, Steve. Now we have a question that I think Zach would be best to answer. Someone asks, I want to attract a new development in my community and ensure it's meaningful for local folks without big negative impacts. However, I'm concerned asking technology companies for too much that could make them pursue projects in other locations instead. How do I balance these dynamics?
Yeah. I mean, this is exactly what Latricia, you were talking about earlier with Memphis and West Memphis across the river. And I think one thing all communities can do is, first of all, prepare for business. So Jasmine mentioned updating strong building energy codes to require new commercial industrial buildings to have the performance they need, to have permitting for clean energy development to build in communities, and have zoning rules to support that. But then getting organized within your community, and in this case, with your neighboring communities, because data center companies do want to build in particular locations. Perhaps they're more favorable interconnection timelines to the transmission grid. It's not just willy-nilly, I'm sure. And so there is some opportunity for communities to have some leverage in this discussion. And then you can think about what is available as well. The West Memphis example, that's like a $25 million energy impact fund. I think I noted it's to help scale energy efficiency and affordability for low-income customers. If I'm someone who wants an ice cream cone and I'm willing to pay $25 million for it, that would indicate I care a lot about getting that ice cream cone. And so there's this opportunity to, as Steve was saying, raise the awareness and the ambition of what communities can do, but then be able to partner perhaps on a slightly more regional level to be organized and have these most effective conversations.
And if I could jump in or to just add on to that, I think it's clear to see from what's going on in the market that data center developers are really desperate for power contracts. So I think we shouldn't necessarily assume that they can put up data centers wherever they want. They are really trying to do this quickly, and there are increasingly few places where they can access hundreds of megawatts of power on short timetables. So I think communities that are being approached may have more leverage than was true a couple of years ago.
I'm sorry, can I add one thing I forgot to add that I think will probably be beneficial to this particular question? And I think someone asked about water as well. Something that is also very unique and interestingly enough, very innovative that is happening in Memphis is the development of a water reuse facility. So in Memphis, we sit on a natural sand aquifer. I mean, it's a rarity of the world. We do everything we can possible to protect the aquifer, not just for overconsumption, but for breaches as well. So XAI is paying for this water reuse facility. So essentially, once this facility is developed, it will take away from the dependence on our aquifer, which is our drinking water, and they will essentially go through the process of taking recycled water and treating it to provide the necessary cooling and other technological needs from water, as opposed to, again, using the same water that consumers use day to day. So we're hoping, and it's something that we're monitoring very closely, but we're hoping that that type of innovation could also be taken into consideration because this water use facility is not only going to be used for XAI, but the neighboring industry as well, like TVA or the Tennessee Valley Authority as well. And in addition to that, there's considerations about the other neighboring industries as well. So we're closely tracking that, and hopefully it will have some influence as you think about addressing the water conservation issue as well.
Thank you, Latricia. That's super helpful. Now, one last question. We have one challenge in getting AI data centers to the table is that state policymakers are actively competing to get data centers to come to their states. Are there any suggested strategies for getting policymakers to focus more on local communities rather than competing with other states? Jasmine?
Yeah, Deborah, thank you so much for this question. I think it's really interesting given the special authority and the perspective that state policymakers have. I think whether you are eager to welcome projects in or are interested in other industries, I think the importance of state level conveners is you do have access to a broad range of stakeholders. You can engage with your local communities to hear concerns and opportunities. You have access to regulators and other legislators who are hearing different questions and concerns from different parts of the state. So I think that my initial reaction to this question is take advantage of the bird's eye level view that state policymakers tend to have to bring all these interests together. And hearing the interests and concerns of all parties can help to determine a path forward.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. And with that, we just wanted to share our report that we based this webinar off of, where we just launched it last week. It's Lightening the Load, Scaling Clean Solutions for Data Centers and Communities. So the same name. You can find that on our website. And we also wanted to share a few other relevant resources that were mentioned during the presentation. RMI's Community Benefits Resources Hub page, as well as a few other papers, which you'll all find linked here, as well as in the email we'll send out after this. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar addressing a critical challenges that communities are facing today. We're so thrilled to share our work with you. We have been recording this session, and the recording will be posted on the event page within 24 hours, along with additional resources. Thank you again for your questions. We'll try our best to reach out to you to answer any that we didn't get to. We really appreciate you attending today and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you all.